They called me senile before I'd even been diagnosed. Not to my face, of course, but I heard them. And worse, I remembered. I'm Margaret Langley, 71 years old, widow, mother of 2, and apparently the family embarrassment. The first time it happened, I was in the middle of serving Sunday dinner. My son Jake had brought his wife, Tasha, and their kids. My daughter, Kelsey, showed up late, again, and immediately launched into a story about how hard it is juggling everything. Work, kids, Pilates, you name it. I remember the moment because I had just pulled the roast from the oven and placed it on the table. The smell was rich and buttery. For a second, it felt like old times, the kind where laughter came easy. Then I dropped the serving spoon. It slipped from my hand, not shaking, just clumsy. I bent down slowly to pick it up, a bit annoyed with myself, and that's when I heard it. Jake whispered, not low enough, to Tasha, "See? It's starting." I pretended I didn't hear, smiled, laughed even. I cracked a joke about how my hands have a mind of their own these days, but that moment didn't leave me. Over the next few weeks, it kept happening. Small comments, sideways glances. I'd mention something twice and Kelsey would say, "You already told us that, Mom," followed by a condescending smile. Tasha started bringing pre-prepared meals, just in case I forget to cook. Then came the moment I couldn't ignore. I was sitting on the porch swing, sorting through the mail. One envelope caught my eye. It was from a law firm. When I opened it, I saw the words, "Transfer of durable power of attorney." My heart nearly stopped. It was already filled out, with Jake's name. No warning, no conversation, just an assumption that I was incapable. That night, I confronted him. "Jake," I said calmly, "why am I receiving legal forms with your name on them, without even asking me?" He looked me straight in the eye and said, "Mom, you've been forgetful. We're just trying to protect you. It's not personal." Not personal? The house I live in was paid off by my husband's hard work and my careful saving. The money in the bank wasn't gifted to me. I earned it through decades of working at the local library, raising 2 kids without complaint, and cutting corners when no one else noticed. I wasn't ready to be buried alive while I was still breathing, but I stayed quiet for a little while. Until one afternoon, I overheard something that broke me. I had gone inside to grab my reading glasses. Jake and Kelsey thought I was still out back. I paused in the hallway when I heard Kelsey say, "She can't even remember her own name. What if she signed something dangerous?" Jake laughed. "She'll sign whatever we put in front of her soon, just a matter of time. Then the house is ours." I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just stood there, my hands trembling, but not from weakness, from fury, because I remembered everything. I remembered every school play I sat through with no one beside me while my husband worked night shifts. I remembered skipping vacations for 20 years so they could have braces and summer camps and graduation photos. I remembered selling my mother's wedding ring just to help Jake make a down payment on his first home. And now, they thought I couldn't even remember my own name. That night, I sat down at the old oak desk in my bedroom and pulled out a leather-bound journal. I wrote everything. Every suspicious change, every passive-aggressive comment, every time they moved something in the house and claimed I had lost it. I labeled it the Book of Truth, because I knew where this was headed. They weren't going to come at me with love or compassion. They were coming with papers, with lawyers, with fake concern and real greed. But what they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was that I had spent 40 years cataloging, cross-referencing, and documenting everything that ever passed through the local library's archives. My memory wasn't broken. It was weaponized, and I was about to make them regret ever doubting the woman who raised them. My house sits on a patch of land that used to be nothing but brush and field. My husband Raymond and I laid every brick of it with our own money. No mortgage, no co-signers, just hard years, small joys, and a love that taught me what it meant to build something worth protecting. Raymond passed 10 years ago, quietly. a cup of tea left untouched beside him, and his glasses still resting on the tip of his nose. I remember the morning like it was stitched into the lining of my heart. And I remember the insurance agent calling the next week. I remember Jake being the first to arrive. And I remember what he said after the funeral, when he poured me a glass of wine and sat beside me on the porch. "Don't worry, Mom. We'll look after you." I believed him. That was before I realized they weren't offering protection. They were preparing a takeover. The signs came slowly, little shifts, like when Jake offered to help with my bills. He asked for access to my online accounts so he could keep things tidy. At first, I appreciated it. Technology isn't my strong suit. Then I noticed my grocery account showed charges for items I hadn't bought, wine I didn't drink, clothes I didn't wear. When I asked about it, he shrugged. "Oh, I probably used the wrong card. I'll fix it." He never did. Then came the mail. Letters I never saw before, some already opened, some marked past due. I found a cable bill addressed to an apartment complex I'd never lived in. I took it to Kelsey, hoping for clarity. She smiled and said, "You must have gotten it mixed up. Maybe you grabbed someone else's mail." But it had my name, my address, my signature. That night, I opened a shoebox under my bed where I kept old birthday cards and bank statements. I started comparing signatures, and that's when I saw it. They weren't the same. Someone was signing on my behalf. A chill ran up my spine. My hands, those same hands that once turned hundreds of pages every week, felt cold as stone. It was happening. Quietly, deliberately. They were turning me into a ghost in my own life. So I made a plan. First, I contacted Dr. Riley, my general physician for nearly 20 years. I asked him to run every memory test, cognitive exam, and neurological scan available. The appointment took nearly 3 hours. When we finished, he sat down and smiled gently. "Margaret, your memory is fine. Above average for your age even. You're still sharp." I asked him for documentation, not just a letter, but a full report. Stamped, signed, and certified. He gave it to me without hesitation. I made 6 copies. Then I called Elaine, my oldest friend. We met in college, became mothers in the same year, and buried our husbands within 2. But Elaine wasn't just a friend. She'd spent 25 years as a paralegal for a probate attorney. When I told her what was happening, she didn't hesitate. She showed up the next morning with a briefcase and a fierce hug. We went through everything. My bank statements, property records, insurance policies. Together we made a binder that would make any courtroom go silent. We labeled it Preemptive Defense. Then we filed a protective affidavit with the county clerk stating that I, Margaret Langley, had no intent to transfer ownership of my assets, no signs of cognitive impairment, and no authorized power of attorney in place. It was a legal firewall. And I didn't tell Jake or Kelsey a single word. Instead, I played along. I let them bring over their lawyer, the man who smiled too much and called me sweetheart in a way that tasted like dust. He said things like, "This is just a standard form, Ms. Langley," and "We just want to keep your interests protected." I smiled, nodded, offered him tea, and I didn't sign a single thing. I wrote down every visit, every word, every eye roll from Kelsey when I asked for clarification, every time Jake said, "Don't worry, Mom, just trust me." I even began recording certain conversations, quietly, legally, just enough to remind myself I wasn't imagining this madness. Then, one Thursday morning, a thick envelope arrived by courier, petition for guardianship, filed by my son, supported by my daughter, claiming that I was mentally unfit to care for myself, that I was suffering from early dementia, that I had become combative, forgetful, and confused. They used those exact words. Jake even listed my own house as an unsecured residence unfit for elder care. Kelsey claimed I once forgot her name during a phone call. I laughed when I read that part, not because it was funny, but because it was so carefully rehearsed. They'd been planting those lies for months. But what they hadn't counted on was that the woman they were trying to erase was the one person who had built her life on remembering the truth. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't even the lies written down in ink, passed through legal channels as if they were facts. It was the slow, deliberate isolation that followed. The day after I received the guardianship petition, Jake showed up without calling. He held out his hand like a peace offering and jingled a set of car keys. "Just until the hearing," he said. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I just watched him drive off in my car, my name still on the title. I never saw that car again. The next week, my credit card stopped working at the pharmacy. When I called the bank, they said the card had been frozen due to inactivity. But I knew the truth. Jake had added online alerts to the account months ago. He had the passwords. He'd offered to help keep track of my finances, remember? And just like that, one piece of independence after another was taken from me. That's how it works, not with chains, but with gentle, patronizing smiles and slowly disappearing options. I tried calling Kelsey. No answer. Then I tried her daughter, my granddaughter, Emily. She picked up on the first ring. "Grandma?" she whispered like she wasn't supposed to be talking to me. "Hi, baby," I said, forcing cheer into my voice. "How's school?" There was a pause. Then she said something that cracked my heart in two. "Mom says you don't even know who I am anymore." I couldn't speak for a second. The silence between us grew heavy. Emily continued before I could form words. "But I don't believe her. I think they're being mean. You remembered my birthday last month. You even sent that book I wanted. People who forget things don't remember stuff like that." I swallowed the lump in my throat and said, "Thank you for saying that, sweetheart. I promise you, I remember everything that matters." We hung up and I sat in the quiet. My hands trembled, not from age but from fury. They had told their children I was losing my mind. My own grandchildren were being taught that I was a problem to be managed, not a person to be loved. I knew what gaslighting looked like. I'd read enough memoirs and heard enough stories from the women at church. But knowing something in theory is different from living it. Suddenly, every word I said felt like a test. Every glance, every pause in conversation. Was I being judged? Measured for mental decay? One afternoon, Kelsey stopped by unexpectedly. She came into the kitchen like she still lived there, opened my fridge, and sighed loudly. "There's expired yogurt in here, Mom," she said. "This is what I mean when I say we're worried." "It expired yesterday," I said quietly. "I hadn't gotten around to taking the trash out." She clucked her tongue. "You left the stove on last month, too. Remember that?" I turned it off 2 minutes later, and I was boiling tea water. She ignored me, scanning the kitchen as if she were an appraiser sizing up a distressed property. Then she pulled out a thick manila folder. "These are the arrangements Jake and I worked out. It's a really nice assisted living center. You'd have your own bathroom, even a small garden." I took the folder and slid it into a drawer. "Thank you," I said. "I'll look over it." She looked surprised, almost disappointed. But what she didn't know was that the drawer had a tiny audio recorder inside, voice activated. I was collecting evidence, because if they were going to try to put me away, they'd have to do it with me wide awake and with a trail behind them. That night, I opened my book of truth again and wrote it all down. The visit, the expired yogurt, the pamphlet, the garden, everything. Then I opened a new tab on my old laptop and began uploading scanned copies of every journal entry, every recording, and every legal document into a secure cloud drive. I sent access to 2 people, Elaine, my paralegal friend, and Dr. Riley, my physician. If they were going to try to bury me with lies, I was going to shine a spotlight on every truth they hoped I wouldn't remember. Because the greatest irony was, they counted on me being silent. But I was never going to be. I had spent my entire life as the background of their story, the woman who cooked and cleaned, supported and sacrificed, bent and folded and yielded. But now I was the one writing the story. And my voice was finally going to be heard. Courtrooms are colder than they look in movies. Not just in temperature, but in spirit. Something about the polished benches, the quiet hum of fluorescent lights, the low murmur of paperwork being shuffled. It makes you feel like you're already on trial the second you walk in. I hadn't stepped foot in a courthouse in over 30 years, not since Raymond and I finalized the deed to the land. But that morning, I walked in, wearing my husband's old watch and the blue wool coat I'd saved for special occasions. I stood tall, spine straight, every gray strand pinned back like armor. Elaine walked beside me, carrying a thick black binder and a look that could turn cement to dust. Jake and Kelsey were already seated. Jake wore a charcoal suit he hadn't ironed. Kelsey wore pity like perfume, faint but cloying. They didn't make eye contact with me. Their lawyer, Mr. Granger, nodded as I passed and said, "Good morning, Ms. Langley." I smiled. "We'll see." We sat. The judge, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a wedding band that gleamed under the lights, entered and took her seat. Then it began. Jake stood first. He spoke in a tone I'd never heard from him before, software measured, sickly sweet. "Your Honor, this isn't easy for us," he began. "We love our mother. But over the past year, we've seen signs. She forgets basic things, names, dates, even how to get to the store sometimes. We found expired food, missed bills, and she refuses help." He gestured to Kelsey, who dabbed her eye with a tissue that I'm sure was bone dry. "She once introduced herself to her own granddaughter," Kelsey said. "Didn't even recognize Emily's face." That was a lie. An outright polished lie. And no one flinched. Mr. Granger submitted a folder of evidence. Photos of expired milk, bank statements showing erratic spending, none of which matched my handwriting. Then the judge turned to me. "Ms. Langley," she said, "you're not required to speak today, but you may if you'd like." I stood up, slowly, not because I'm frail, but because I wanted them to feel the weight of every single step I took. "I would like to speak," I said. Elaine placed the binder on the table in front of me. I opened it and began. "Over the past 6 months," I said, "I've kept a daily journal documenting my routines, interactions, and every odd occurrence in my home. Here's an entry from April 3rd. Found the phone bill in the trash even though I hadn't paid it yet. Wondered if Jake threw it out when he came to check the mailbox." I flipped the page. April 14th. Kelsey brought over pre-made meals, noticed the fridge light wasn't working, later found the bulb unscrewed, made note to document these strange patterns. Flip. April 27th. Credit card declined. Called bank. Found someone had set up a secondary user with online access. That user? Jake Langley. Jake's face paled. Kelsey's lips pressed tight. I kept going. May 12th. Recorded conversation in which Jake said, quote, "She's too out of it to know what's hers anymore." I looked up and pressed play on the small recorder in my hand. Jake's voice filled the courtroom. Every word crystal clear, no distortion, no context needed. "She's too out of it to know what's hers anymore. Just give it a few months. Then we can sell the place and split it." The courtroom fell silent. Even Mr. Granger leaned back slightly in his chair. I looked directly at the judge. I may be old. I may forget where I left my keys or whether I fed the cat, but I haven't forgotten who I am. I haven't forgotten what's mine, and I certainly haven't forgotten what betrayal sounds like. Elaine stood next to me and handed over the doctor's report from Dr. Riley, signed, certified, and dated just 2 weeks ago. The judge took a moment to read. Then she leaned forward. "Mr. Langley," she said sharply, "did you obtain power of attorney through your mother's consent?" Jake stammered. Well, I assumed. That will be a yes or no?" "No," he admitted. The judge nodded. "Petition for guardianship is denied, and given the nature of this recording, Ms. Langley, you may file a claim for elder abuse or financial manipulation if you choose. You retain all rights to your estate, your assets, and your independence." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Jake lowered his head. Kelsey turned her face away. And just like that, the courtroom doors opened again. But this time, I walked out stronger than I had walked in, because I hadn't just won my case. I had reminded my children, my betrayers, that this old woman still had a voice, and they would never drown it out again. The silence after the hearing was louder than the gavel. Jake didn't look at me as I passed him in the corridor. Kelsey whispered something to their lawyer, who offered me a quick, dry nod before disappearing behind his briefcase, like a magician escaping his own trick. But it wasn't over. The court had denied their petition, yes, but the damage had been done. Not just to my name, but to my soul. My children, the very ones I held when they were helpless, had sat in front of a judge and painted me as a confused old woman who could barely function. And for what? A house? A bank account? Control? Back at home, I stood in my kitchen and stared at the old ceramic jar on the windowsill, the one labeled flour that never held flour. It had once hidden candy from the kids. Now it held something else. 2 USB drives, labeled Plan A and Plan B. I wasn't done yet. Jake and Kelsey thought that courtroom moment was the climax, that I'd crawl back to my quiet little life, grateful to have survived the ambush. But I wasn't interested in surviving. I wanted closure and justice. So I opened the folder Elaine and I had labeled Phase 2. Inside was a copy of the emergency revocation notice I'd filed quietly with the county registrar months ago. It removed any old medical proxies, named a trusted third party as my estate consultant, and froze any pending property transactions tied to my name. I'd done it before they even filed for guardianship, just in case. Jake had tried to transfer the title of my car to himself. I had proof, screenshots, a rejected DMV application in his handwriting. Elaine made sure it was all recorded and notarized. We submitted it to the same judge within 48 hours of the hearing, a separate motion. We also filed a formal complaint with Adult Protective Services, not out of vengeance, but because the law needed to know. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was fraud. The investigator came quietly 2 weeks later. She asked questions. I answered them calmly, journal in hand, recordings cued. She blinked when I played one where Jake told Kelsey, "Once we get her in the care home, we'll clean out the attic and list the property. I already know a realtor." That audio wasn't from the courtroom. This was new. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was premeditated. The next day, both Jake and Kelsey received certified letters notifying them of a pending inquiry into elder exploitation. Elaine and I made sure a copy went to their employers too. Subtle, discreet, but real. It was only then I started receiving texts. From Jake, "Can we talk?" From Kelsey, "This has gone too far. We're still your family." Family. They used that word like a shield, as if blood was a hall pass for cruelty. I didn't respond. Instead, I called my granddaughter, Emily. She picked up immediately. "Grandma?" Her voice was small, nervous. "Hi, darling. Just wanted to hear your voice." We talked for 20 minutes. She told me about her school project. I told her about the tomatoes finally blooming in the backyard. Then I asked, carefully, "What did your mom say after court?" There was a pause. "She said you embarrassed her. But I think she's embarrassed because you didn't let them get away with it." Smart girl. After we hung up, I sat in the garden and stared up at the sky. The same sky I used to watch with Jake when he was a boy, lying in the grass, pointing out clouds shaped like dragons and bears. What happened to that boy? Maybe he got tired. Maybe he got greedy. Maybe he forgot the softness that raised him. But I hadn't forgotten. That night, I received one more message from Jake's wife, Tasha. It was a single line. For what it's worth, I warned him. The next morning, Elaine and I met with a local journalist who specialized in elder law abuse. She was writing a feature for a regional magazine. I told her everything. On the record, names, dates, tactics, audio, not because I wanted fame, but because someone else, somewhere, was being told they forgot something they never touched. Someone else was being treated like they were slipping, when the truth was, they were being pushed. A month later, the article went live. Its title? She Remembered Everything, a mother's fight against her own children's greed. The story spread, not virally, not with noise, but with whispers. Whispers that reached Jake's boss, Kelsey's neighborhood, their church, their friends. And just like that, they stopped speaking to each other and to me, because some truths are too loud to bury, and I had finally said mine. The funny thing about truth is, it doesn't knock politely, it crashes through walls, and when it does, people scatter. Not because they're afraid of you, but because they're afraid of what they said when they thought you'd never speak. After the article went live, my house got quiet in a new way, not the kind of silence that aches, but the kind that heals. No more unannounced visits, no more fake check-ins, no more gaslighting under the mask of concern. Just peace. I started planting again. Nothing fancy. Some basil, a few marigolds. I made tea with my own mint leaves. I even found Raymond's old bird feeder in the shed and hung it back up. Neighbors started waving more often. One of them, a retired nurse named Carol, stopped by with lemon muffins and said, "You made us all proud, Margaret. A lot of us have stories like that, but we didn't know how to tell them." That's when I realized this wasn't just my story. This kind of betrayal, it wasn't rare. It was just quiet. Too many women like me were suffering in soft, invisible ways, disrespected by their own families, slowly erased one forgotten moment at a time. So I decided to make noise. With help from Elaine and Emily, I started a weekly podcast. Just my voice, some tea, and a microphone. I called it The Mind Is Still Mine. Each episode I shared stories, mine and others, tips on spotting red flags, laws people didn't know existed, advice from lawyers and social workers, and mostly reminders that memory loss isn't a death sentence and aging isn't consent for disrespect. To my surprise, it grew. Emails came in, then letters. A woman in Indiana said she was about to sign over her property until she heard my story. A man from Florida said his sister had been doing the same thing to their mother. He thanked me for giving their mom the words to fight back. I wasn't just reclaiming my own power. I was helping others find theirs too. Jake never reached out again. Neither did Kelsey. But I heard things, small things. Jake lost his job after his employer read the article. There was a conflict of trust. Kelsey moved out of state not long after. Her marriage didn't survive the shame. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just kept planting. On the anniversary of the hearing, I invited Emily over for dinner. She brought her laptop, asked if I wanted help uploading another episode. We sat together, editing audio, sipping tea, laughing like friends. And at one point, she turned to me and said, "I'm sorry they tried to take everything from you." I looked at her, this smart, kind, brave girl, and said, "They didn't take everything. They just taught me what was actually mine." It's been nearly 2 years now. The leaves have turned and fallen twice. The birds keep coming back to the feeder. My garden, once patchy and tired, now blooms every spring like it's defying time itself. I still live in the same house, mine, legally and emotionally. The floors still creak in the same places. The window still sticks in the upstairs hallway, and I still have the drawer full of journals marked truth. But I haven't needed to add to them in a long while. Some wounds close with bandages, others with distance. Jake and Kelsey? They never spoke again. Not to me, not to each other. What they did and what they lost split more than my trust. It fractured whatever illusion of unity they once performed. I grieved that. Quietly. In the mornings, mostly, with coffee and the sound of the wind. You can love someone your whole life and still choose to live without them. And sometimes, that's the bravest choice of all. Then, one afternoon, something unexpected happened. I was at a small local event, a fundraiser for senior outreach programs. I had just spoken on stage, sharing my story, answering questions. As I walked down the steps, a woman approached me. Dark hair pulled back neatly, tired eyes, nervous smile. It was Tasha, Jake's ex-wife. I hadn't seen her since the courtroom, but I remembered the look on her face even then, tight-lipped, withdrawn, quietly horrified. She took a deep breath. I just wanted to say, "I'm sorry, I should have said something sooner. I knew something wasn't right, but I stayed out of it." I studied her face for a moment, not coldly, just gently. "I appreciate that," I said, "and I know how hard it is to speak up when it feels like no one's listening." She hesitated, then handed me a small envelope. "This is from Emily. She's applying to universities. She wrote about you in her essay." I opened the letter that night after dinner. Inside was a printed page. The title read, "The Woman Who Remembered Everything." She wrote about how I taught her to tell the truth, even when it hurts. How I showed her what resilience looks like. How I turned a courtroom into a battleground and walked out a survivor. I cried, not because I was sad, but because after everything I lost, there in that essay, I saw what I had kept. Legacy. Not money, not property, not dignity wrapped in silence, but the kind of legacy that moves forward, that teaches, that protects. They said I couldn't remember my own name, but I remembered everything. Every injustice, every lie, every quiet, painful moment I spent wondering if I was the crazy one. And most importantly, I remembered who I was before they tried to convince me otherwise. So here's what I want you to know. If you've made it this far into my story, you are not invisible, you are not crazy, and you are not alone. They tried to take everything from me, but what they really gave me was my voice, and I will never let it be taken again.